Joining us now is the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Jake Wallis Simons. Thanks for coming on board, Jake. Obviously, what happened on Monday was extremely tragic and regrettable. No one is disputing that. Israel has apologised and said it was a mistake that happened under nightfall. And the reason I wanted to get you on is what's worrying me is the narrative now is evil Israel definitely did this on purpose. And therefore, we must stop selling arms to Israel, etc., etc. Well, I would contend that nothing has been proved. Israel has said it's investigating. We need to wait before we condemn, don't we?
Yes, I mean, last year, 62 aid workers were killed around the world. And British and American forces have had our own fair share of mistakenly killing aid workers and other civilians. In 2021, for example, an American drone strike killed 10 civilians in Kabul, including an aid worker and 7 children. In Libya, under David Cameron's government, who is now obviously the foreign secretary, so critical of Israel, we killed 13 people in a friendly fire incident, including ambulance workers. And there have been other incidents as well in 2008, in 2004. Gaza is an extremely complex environment. It's very, very difficult to get things right all the time. And tragedies happen in war, as we know from our own experience. And to use this as some kind of supposed evidence of Israel being in some kind of bloodthirsty rage, disregarding the welfare of civilians is absolutely wrong. It's been proven by experts who've been on the ground and observed things in Gaza and Israel, including John Spencer, the head of the American urban warfare program at West Point most recently, that Israel is taking extraordinary measures to protect civilian life. And that has led to a civilian to combatant casualty ratio of about 1 to 1.5 civilians killed for every combatant, which is unprecedented in urban warfare. So yes, tragedies do happen. I'm not for 1 minute excusing or seeking to downplay the civilian suffering, which is appalling in Gaza. But look, civilians are suffering is appalling in every war around the world, because war is hell. This is a just and defensive war, but it doesn't make it any less hellish.
No, it doesn't, Jake, but you've highlighted a few incidents from the past, but we're talking about 200 aid workers killed in Gaza by Israeli forces in 6 months. This isn't an isolated, they've just killed 3 people here. 5 years ago, 10 people killed there. This is 200 lives gone in 6 months. That is reckless. And with your ratio of combatants to civilians, it actually works out about 20,000 people dead for every 10,000 Hamas soldiers killed.
What I would say is be very careful at the figures and facts that you rely upon, because those coming out of Gaza are coming from Hamas and are censored by Hamas. For example, those figures of aid workers, we know that aid workers, sometimes, Gazan aid workers, are often or sometimes have been found to be working for Hamas and also working for aid groups. We even saw that with UNRWA, the UN body that's been charged with giving aid to Palestinians. A number of those were found to have taken part in October the 7th massacres. So I would be wary about those figures. What we do know is that these 7 were killed who were legitimate, brave aid workers doing good humanitarian work, and their deaths is an absolute tragedy. And I'm not wanting to downplay that for a moment. And similarly, every civilian casualty is a tragedy. I'm not wanting to downplay that either. But war, as I've said, is hell. And every war, every modern war, includes killings of civilians, including our own in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and elsewhere. And I think that Israel is not only acting in a similar way to every other democracy in war, it's actually going to further measures to protect civilians that no other country in the world has done.
Jake, I don't feel that can be true, Jake. On the 9th of October last year, 2 days after the atrocity in Israel committed by Hamas, the Defence Minister, Yoav Gallant, declared Israel was imposing a complete siege on Gaza. There'll be no electricity, no food, no fuel. Everything is closed. The next day, he told Israeli troops he had released all restraints. And at the time, because of the atrocity on the 7th, the world was in support. Israel has a right to defend itself. But at what point do we say that Israel is no longer defending itself and it is just being reckless in its pursuit of Hamas?
No, I don't think that's correct at all. Sieges are not illegal under international law. We've used sieges ourselves, for example, in the Battle of Mosul against the Islamic State in 2016-17. We besieged the city, bombed it from the air, and ended up killing 9,000 civilians while we destroyed Islamic State in that city. Israel has gone to measures that no other country has gone to in terms of protecting civilian lives, including dropping millions of leaflets, making millions of phone calls warning civilians to leave combat zones, even dropping speakers from the air on parachutes broadcasting warnings to civilians to move, and as a result has protected many, many civilian lives. We must recognize that Hamas is trying to use human shields to put them in harm's way so that they will be killed in the war, so that journalists like you and others will then point the finger at Israel, bringing international pressure upon Israel not to retaliate. And that is Hamas's strategy for victory. We must wise up to that strategy coming from Gaza, coming from Hamas, and stop playing into their hands by repeating their statistics and carrying out their propaganda further into the West.
What worries me, Jake, is that, you've got people like David Cameron, now Rishi Sunak, contemplating stopping selling arms to an ally, as in Israel. The Israeli ambassador was called to the Foreign Office the other day as if he was the ambassador for Iran or some sort of developing nation, third world state. It seems to me that Britain and other Western countries are starting to treat Israel almost like an enemy. Does this narrative worry you? And can I ask you an added question? Only recently, Benjamin Netanyahu said that victory, that Hamas being destroyed, was only months away. Do you think we're anywhere near that happening? Because I believe Netanyahu at least needs to convince himself that he has destroyed Hamas, and then we can move on. But first of all, can you address my question about the way we seem to be treating Israel like an enemy? And I don't like that, personally.
Yes, I mean, you're absolutely right. There is a hardening of rhetoric towards Israel when we share the same democratic values, the same democratic system, and by the way, the same jihadi enemy as the Jewish state. I mean, this stuff about stopping arms exports to Israel is absurd, given the fact that 70% of his imported Israeli arms come from the United States, and those from France, Germany, and Italy are greater than those coming from Britain. Not only that, but Britain imports a great deal of arms from Israel as well. And the relationship is of greater benefit, arguably, to us than to them. Israel was our third biggest manufacturer of arms for British forces. And those, particularly the drones, Israeli drones, have been deployed to keep our forces safe in Afghanistan and Iraq and elsewhere. So I think that we would be very foolish to harm that relationship under the influence of this propaganda. But you're absolutely right that we risk turning an ally into a pariah purely because we are swallowing some of the propaganda that's coming out of Gaza. We do know that Hamas intentionally does not release any figures of combatant casualties, trying to give the impression that all of the dead are civilians in Gaza, that Israel is somehow waging a war against civilians. In addition to that, it doesn't allow, it censors footage coming out of Gaza. The stuff that you see on your screens, you never ever see any footage of dead Hamas combatants, only of civilians, trying to reinforce this impression that Israel is somehow waging war on civilians. Israel is not doing so. It is trying to protect civilians while destroying Hamas. Now, you mentioned whether this goal of destroying Hamas is possible. I believe it is. It's not going to be easy. It will depend upon an assault in Rafah, having taken all possible precautions to protect the 1.4 million civilians there and getting them out of harm's way first. But without an assault on Rafah, it's difficult to foresee how Hamas could be destroyed. If Hamas is not destroyed, that really would be the end of peace. They don't believe in the two-state solution. What they do believe in is carrying out October the 7th again and again and again, which of course would precipitate another retaliation, another war, and an endless spiral of bloodshed. So Hamas has got to go if we want to have peace. And Britain, like the rest of the Western world, should get behind Israel in that goal to destroy our joint jihadi enemy and obviously pressure Israel to limit civilian casualties as much as it can do. But the ultimate goal has got to be to eliminate this jihadi evil, Hamas.
OK. Jake, thank you very much for your time. Always a pleasure. Thank you.